Federal government pledges to spend more on infrastructure across the country. Federal government warns of a risk of second recession. Plus, Nigeria's unemployment rate rises to 27.1%. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The program is Business Express on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, and we're reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Moplang Dakok. It's so good to have you tuned to Business Express. Latest data released this morning by the National Bureau of Statistics says the unemployment rate in Nigeria rose to 27.1% in the second quarter of 2020 from the 23.1% recorded in the third quarter of 2018. The NBS, in its labor force statistics, unemployment rate says unemployment rate increased from 20.1% in the third quarter of 2018 to 28.6% in the second quarter of 2020. It said second quarter 2020, the unemployment rate among young people of 15 to 34 years was 34.9%, up from 29.7%, while the rate of underemployment for the same age group rose to 28.2% from 25.7% in the third quarter of 2018. The NBS said the number of persons in the economically active or working age population, that is between 15 to 64 years of age, increased to 116.871 million from 115.492 million in the third quarter of 2018. The federal government says unless the country achieves a strong third quarter economic performance in 2020, the country stands the risk of going into a second recession with significant adverse consequences. Minister of State for Finance, Budget and National Planning, Clement Agba, stated this at an interactive session with the House of Representatives Joint Committees on Finance, Appropriation, Budget and Economic Development, as well as loans and debt management. He also warns that Nigeria faces significant medium-term fiscal challenges, especially with respect to its revenues, which, if not immediately addressed, could snowball into debt sustainability crisis. The minister also adds that the COVID-19 pandemic resulting in crash of global oil prices, among other economic factors, had adversely affected the nation's economy, with the gross domestic product growth for second quarter most likely to be negative.
Increased vigor to improve revenue collection and expenditure management.
The federal government has pledged to spend more infrastructure across the country, focusing on finishing projects delivered by local contractors and technology that creates jobs for thousands of Nigerians. President Muhammadu Buhari made the pledge at the virtual inauguration of the new headquarters building of the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, NCDMB, in Yenagoa, Bayelsa State. The president says the iconic 17-story building, known known as the Nigerian Content Tower, with the full complements of a 10 megawatts power plant and 1,000-seater conference center, reflects his administration's drive to provide infrastructure across the country to attract investments, create jobs, and eradicate poverty.
A landmark of reference in the Niger Delta to reflect long-lasting legacies that signpost the years of oil and gas exploitation, and I assure you that there is more to come.
Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission has lamented missed opportunities occasioned by continued flaring of gas in Nigeria. A statement signed by the agency's head of public communications, Christian Nwachukwu, also projected that an annual revenue generation of $1 billion from gas if the gas sector was properly harnessed. The chairman of the commission, Elias Mbam, noted that flared gas could be converted and channeled to the economy where more than 2 million people could be employed, and added that in line with the current dwindling revenue from oil, gas economy could be a safe haven for the country. Mbam called for more development of the gas infrastructure with a view to harnessing more revenue from the sector to the Federation account. Now, the AFCFTA agreement, which has now been signed by 54 of the 55 African Union member countries, envisages the establishment of a massive free trade zone with the potential to generate an estimated $3.2 trillion worth of inter-country trade across Africa. What does this mean for the oil and gas sector? Today on the program, we will be discussing the place of oil and gas in the AFCFTA. Our guest is Vice President, Gas to Energy Group of Nigeria, Olabode Sanwomi. Thank you so much for coming to Business Express today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So, so many things have been talked about in terms of the AFCFTA, which has been put on hold for now. However, we've talked about agriculture, we've talked about manufacturing. Not so much has been said about oil and gas. What's the place of oil and gas in the AFCFTA when it comes on board?
I think that's a very interesting perspective,
okay,
which has not really been given sufficient attention.
Okay.
I think primarily for the energy industry, basically, there need to be key drivers for it within the AFTA. In other words, it's going to be a little more than just the activities of the Ministry of Trade. They may need input from the Ministry of Petroleum, related agencies, and the private sector. And the reason being that there is a total dysfunction in terms of how Africa does its trade within the oil and gas sector and the possible benefits. And a simple example is what happens with South Africa in terms of its LNG and Nigeria also in terms of its LNG. You know, we've talked about Train 7 and the benefits to it.
Yes.
But guess what? Train 7 already has a client, a customer for it when it's completed, and it's in Japan. South Africa, on the other hand, is importing LNG. And guess what? They're importing it from the US. So you have South Africa and some other countries within the African continent that need LNG, that need gas for a number of things like gas to power, gas to industries, and the related works. And they are going outside of Africa to buy it. You don't need intelligence to know that that would be more expensive than it would if they were buying it from Nigeria. So the issue is that Africa as a whole has certain significant major producers of oil and gas in the world. We have OPEC nations. I mean, we start from Libya to Algeria to Nigeria to Angola to Gabon and all of that.
But do we have enough gas for the continent for consumption, local consumption on the continent? And then talking about Nigeria, do we have enough in Nigeria?
Yes, we do.
In Nigeria or in
yes,
Africa?
Yes, we do. If we choose to develop our framework, I mean, to develop the structure, the value chain, such that we can feed the whole of Africa and feed ourselves. You know, now certain things need to be understood. We have gas, but not all of it is available for local consumption. It's like saying you have an ocean of water surrounding you, but simply because an ocean of water is surrounding you does not mean you have drinking water. That water needs to be processed, desalinated, and all that made to make it available. The same thing with the gas. The gas needs to be developed. The upstream aspect of it needs to be developed. Then it will be moved midstream through the transportation before we can benefit from it downstream. When we talk LNG, that's the liquefaction of gas. You're basically talking about export. That's to external markets. So the issue is that when we talk about pipelines, whether it's the Trans-Nigerian Saharan pipeline or whether it is NLNG, we're talking about export of gas. So if we are going to talk about how we're going to trade with the rest of Africa, we're going to be talking about pipelines that will run across the whole of Africa, possibly the two that have been suggested, the one that goes from Nigeria to Algeria to Europe, or the one that goes from Nigeria to Morocco to Europe. Whichever way, you are able to feed those countries that are along that that route, and then Europe as well. That it should be understood that one of the strongholds, both politically and economically, that Russia has all over Europe is the fact that Russia is the main supplier of gas across the 30+ nations that are in Europe. If Nigerian Gas is able to move through the AFTA agreement and all that across that place into Europe, we
we'll have an extended power, because we already have power.
We have economic power and political power to discuss with nations on Europe. And it's on that basis that a lot of things can be discussed. You can discuss fairer treatment of Nigerians there. You can discuss maybe seats within the UN and get their support. You know, the dynamics changes. It becomes the politics of international relations and all that. But we need to do the needful for us to get to that stage. Even by developing that pipeline, we begin to have stronger influence among African nations. Because if you are not able to impact the economic realities of nations, there is limited activities you can do to have political power over them.
Let's talk about the AKK gas pipeline that is in the pipeline. What do you make of it? How optimistic are you actually about it?
The AKK pipeline is a beautiful project, whichever way you look at it. First of all, it is part of the development of our infrastructure. So we're talking about gas infrastructure in Nigeria and all of that. It's beautiful, it's developing that. Not only that, it also falls along the pathway for the Trans-African pipeline that I talked about. But having said that, there are certain fundamentals that make a project to be workable, which has not been looked at into details. Because for every gas project in the nature of this, there must be what you call off-takers for the gas to make it workable, to make it commercially viable, to make it a proper business case. As it is today, a lot of those off-takers don't exist. There are plants on the way, but they remain that plants. So for the AKK project to be what it should be and what is being envisaged, along with the plans to make the pipeline to be constructed, there must be significant plans that will stimulate the necessary industries that can benefit from those gas, including those power plants, such that they become economic entities within themselves. So, because usually people ask, what should come first? Should the off-takers come first, or should the pipeline come first? Because the off-takers will be the industries, whether it is gas to power, whether it is gas-based industries like fertilizers and aluminium that use gas as feedstock, or whether it is even LNG plants that will be bottling domestic cooking gas and all of that. But should those ones come first before the pipeline, or should the pipeline come first?
Which one should come first?
It's a chicken and egg scenario. You understand? Both need to be developed in tandem. So now that the pipeline is going, let those industries to start to grow so that it become viable. That's on one side. The other side of it is that we need to develop upstream investment for gas, such that we have local gas available for consumption locally. You know, initially I talked about water everywhere, but not available to drink. We don't want a situation where Nigeria is a gas nation, but locally we don't have gas.
Okay, the petroleum industry bill
PIB
has been, PIB has been there since 2008, I think, and up till now, many people are saying we are not moving forward because it has not yet been passed. What do you think of that bill?
You see, the PIB becomes what will be the grand norm for the workings of the oil and gas industry. It will technically become the Bible, the constitution for the workings of the industry. And it is important because when we understand how the industry currently functions, vis-a-vis how it should function, the PIB spells out the role and the creation of an independent regulator, which doesn't exist at the moment. A lot of the regulatory functions for the industry today comes between DPR and NNPC. Which is government, which is a bit of a misnomer, because NNPC is also a player with NPDC. So what that means technically is that you have, if you compare it with the broadcast industry, it's like NBC also being a broadcaster.
So is it that if the bill is not passed and the AFCFTA takes off, are you trying to say that we may not perform too well since we don't yet have that bill?
Well, I cannot say that with justification. But what I can say is that if we pass the bill, life will be easier, things will work well.
Okay. All right. How soon do you see us getting to the promised land in terms of gas production and distribution and consumption in Nigeria?
I think rather than predicting timelines and dates, it will be better to say, let us do the right thing and continue doing the right thing.
So what is the right thing?
The part of the challenges has been there hasn't been continuity between governments, even times when it's the same party. So each government comes in and starts from the beginning and starts from a new part. But rather, because government is a continuum, the concept of gas development needs to be taken over from government to government. It is that consistency over a period that leads to institutions being built. But if each person that comes in wants to start his own idea, each person will start something and they actually do nothing. So the biggest challenge we have now should be continuum. There must be a continuum in terms of the activities that are taking place, such that we have a determined, focused, and realistic set of activities that will channel responsibility.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanwo-Oluwa, for coming on the program. This is where we have to end this discussion, but we are glad that you came.
Thank you, madam.
Mr. Olabode Sanwo-Oluwa is the Vice Chairman, Gas to Energy Group, Nigerian Gas Association. Moving on, gold prices rose for a third straight session on Friday, supported by a weaker US dollar, with investors awaiting the release of Chinese economic data due later in the day. A look at the commodity market is next. On the oil market, oil prices advanced this Friday and we're heading for a second week of gains amid growing confidence that demand for fuel is starting to pick up despite the coronavirus pandemic. Brent crude was up 14 cents at $45.10 a barrel, heading for a gain of about 1.6% this week, while West Texas Intermediate gained 12 cents to $42.36 a barrel. The U.S. benchmark is heading for a gain of nearly 3% this week. The dollar drifted higher on Friday, helped by strong U.S. jobs data as well as firmer global demand for safe havens amid concerns about the coronavirus recovery, setting the currency up to potentially snap a 7-week losing streak. Let's see how the Naira is exchanging for other international currencies. And on the capital market, transactions on the last day of trading for the week on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange ended in negative territory. The NSE All Share Index and market capitalization fell by 0.15% to close at 25,199.84 basis points as traders exchanged 482.5 million shares valued at 4.5 billion naira in 3,897 deals. Asia-Pacific markets were mixed in trade on Friday as investors remained cautious after U.S. lawmakers seemed unable to move forward with a coronavirus stimulus bill. Olainka Ojo takes it up from here.
As the pandemic persists, markets in Africa were mostly bearish this Friday as oil heads for second weekly advance. South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40 depreciated by 0.64%. Kenya's Nairobi All Share Index and the GSE Composite of Ghana were pointing downwards, except Tunisia's Tunidex, which advanced by 0.18%. Outside Africa, European stocks also went down this Friday as fresh UK quarantine rules affect travels and leisure shares. The German DAX slipped by 1.34% to close at 12,819.17 points. The CAC 40 of France and the FTSE also depreciated. Futures on the United States equity benchmark also slipped in early trade. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by 156 points. Asia stocks, however, closed mostly higher, but investors are still monitoring developments in the coronavirus crisis. Nikkei advanced 0.17%. Shanghai also went up by 1.19%, while the Hang Seng Index dropped by 0.19%.
Thank you very much, Olainka. And with the global market update, we end the episode of the program. Don't forget you can access this and previous episodes on YouTube, and you can communicate with us on Twitter. The handle is @NTA News Now. The hashtag is BizX. Join us again on Monday next week for another package. But until then, make sure you observe the set down guidelines to fight COVID-19. I am Muplang Dakok.